Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm great, Mike. How are you this fine day?
I am good. Very excited. We have a special guest coming up later on in this episode.
How cool is that we get to talk about movies and then talk to some of the coolest people in our business? And I think that, to have someone as esteemed as Jackie Brenneman on the program is really exciting, I think, for both of us. Right, Mike?
I do want to say Jackie is fantastic. We've worked with Jackie for, when I say we, it's, my Paper Airplane team has done it. We've worked on National Cinema Day with her, with National Popcorn Day. Back in the Lionsgate days, we did many things with our friends over at Nato. And she is an unsung hero when it comes to what happened during the pandemic. And hopefully she'll talk a little bit about that and what she did to be able to secure funds and grants for these theaters that were just a mere 2 years ago. Paul, do you realize, you and I have been talking about a $4 billion summer. 2 years ago, we were sitting here. At this point, we had done about $535 million of total box for the year.
The summer in 2020 generated a whopping $179 million.
We forget about, the dire straits that not just our industry, but, kind of the global economy was at, 2 years ago. As, you fast forward now and things are humming, and a lot of issues that this industry was facing have now been, resolved or addressed to a point where things are much better off. But I'd like to get into real quick this weekend, talk a little bit about those grosses that we saw with Fast X.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's get into it. And then I think Jackie's in the waiting room. She's in the green room waiting. We'll bring her on in a bit. Jackie Brenneman, again, is our great guest today. So keep listening. She is the president of the Cinema Foundation and executive vice president and general counsel at Nato, Mike, National Association of Theater Owners. So stay tuned for our very special interview with Jackie Brenneman. Mike, how do you say it? Is it Fast X or Fast 10?
I'm going Fast X. I've been told that's kind of the way to go. So I'm going with that. Now, let me ask you this, Paul. How would you characterize the opening?
Wow. Global.
Well, good point. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and that was exactly what came up. Was we can't look at this in the microcosm of just how it did domestically, but I do want to point out from a domestic standpoint. So the movie ended up doing, I think it was $67.5 million, something like that.
That's right.
It's the 10th installment of a franchise. How many films have we looked at that have had 10 installments to start with?
Dude, you got to go back to James Bond to find that kind of, even, close to that kind of longevity with still that kind of viability and interest from audiences.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, is like there was a little bit of snarkiness in some of the stories about, has it run out of gas and that kind of thing. But
yeah,
you ask anybody in exhibition if they would take a $67 million opening, and they would be like all day long.
Absolutely. For me, it's the Rodney Dangerfield of film franchises, the Fast and Furious. It just can't get no respect. I mean, no matter what they do, with the close to $7 billion in global box office across all these films, the Hobbs and Shaw spinoff, this is a franchise that started way back in 2001. And here we are in Mike, you're absolutely right. This is a big deal, and it's still viable. Now, I will say, thank goodness for the international, because on a couple of these films, they earned $1 billion internationally and a couple $100 million in the domestic market. So it's very important. I think the reason the franchise still exists is because, and with the pretty sizable budgets for these films, but thank goodness for, hey, it's a global business, wherever the money comes from.
That's what it comes down to. And ultimately, it's a success. Domestically, it's a success. I mean, I think we should look at it. It's the 14th straight weekend we've now had a film do over $30 million.
Yeah.
That streak is going to continue going into next week. You brought up a really good point last week, and one that I
did
considered. And that was, we're still 26% behind where we were in 2019. And lo and behold, overall box office is off about 25%. What a shock that it would correlate exactly with the number of wide releases we are lacking. Hey, Paul, before we get to our special guest, I did want to bring up something that was really interesting this weekend. So last Tuesday, Super Mario Brothers, the movie, went to PVOD. Do you realize that this weekend at the box office, it had its lowest drop of the run? It was off only
It's like 22% or something.
22% while it was available in home. That's a head scratcher a little bit, but I think it also shows that these platforms are finding a way to coexist.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who thinks that these platforms, small screen, big screen, are adversarial has it wrong. And I think, again, it speaks volumes as to these preconceived ideas we have about the business and how antiquated some of our thought, and by our, I mean, just the royal we. And so I think that's really an Air. We saw that with Air the week before. It hit Amazon Prime and was still in the top 10 at the box office. So, Mike, I think time and again, we're being proven right in our steadfast commitment to the movie theater and its continued viability, and absolutely way more than viable. It's essential. And with our next guest, I think she's going to really bring that point home.
And with that, why don't we flip it over and let's go talk to Jackie.
Without further ado, Jackie Brenneman is our guest today. Welcome, Jackie.
Hello.
Jackie is the president of the Cinema Foundation, executive vice president, and general counsel at the National Association of Theater Owners, Nato. Welcome to the program. Welcome to Ticket to Ride with Mike Polydorus, my esteemed co-host, and me, Paul DeGarabedian, senior media analyst for Comscore. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here to chat with both of you.
I just want to give a little background. So obviously I've worked with Jackie for many years now, previously on the studio side, and then over the last couple of years on the paper airplane side. And her and her team are nothing but fantastic over at NATO and the Cinema Foundation. And the things that they've done behind the scenes is pretty amazing. I know firsthand about the small venue grants and how really a lot has been made about how those grants really made the industry survive over the last couple of years. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is how involved Jackie was in making sure that all that happened. So just on that end, Jackie, just a big thanks to you and your team for everything you guys pulled off.
It was a full industry effort, honestly. It took everyone. We had over 100 directors write a letter to Congress asking them to support movie theaters, right? We had just support from truly anyone and everyone who cares about the cinema experience. So I was really honored to be able to have any role in that piece.
And I remember back when the pandemic first hit, March 2020 is emblazoned in my brain because of what it represented to the industry. And I know that coming back from that has been just incredible. And I think there were a lot of people at the time who thought it'd be an insurmountable challenge, that the inevitable demise of the movie theater was accelerated by the pandemic, something I never believed would happen. But I know that, Jackie, for you, the Cinema Foundation and NATO, this was like rally the troops, get everything together, start creating initiatives to ensure the long-term viability of the industry. Can you talk a little bit about what it felt like in that moment, and then fast forward to now and how much everything has changed for the positive?
For my own mental health, I have created a really nice mechanism where I can't go back and feel those feelings of March 2020.
Good. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that up. I'm sorry.
No, I watched, I don't know, I certainly recommend anyone who hasn't seen to watch Only in Theaters, which is a documentary about the Laemmle family and their theaters, which just was already underway and it had nothing to do with the pandemic. And then as the documentary was being recorded, the pandemic hit. So you have this documentary crew following a family business during the worst of it. And I will say that I was given a screener of that movie. I was invited to an in-person screening where the Laemmle Foundation was actually offering a donation to the Cinema Foundation. But in advance of that, we watched that movie. And I'm very glad that I screened it the first time in a place where I could pause, because I needed to cry a lot. It really brought up a lot of feelings. It was a really PTSD-inducing experience, I will say. But I highly recommend it for anyone in this industry at all, because I think we have forgotten a lot of this. And I want to go to a point that you made about the inevitable demise of movie theaters, because I do think that was a theory on the table, was, do we need movie theaters anymore, right? And I think the movie theater industry was very right to say, we think day and date is not a sustainable business model for movie theaters. And so when Day and Date happened, it was certainly Day and Date happened and movie theaters were mostly closed. And so if that was going to be the end of movie theaters, then it would have been the end of movie theaters. I think that that's a fair way to characterize that. The interesting, good, silver lining, however we want to describe it, is certainly that movie theaters did not face that inevitable demise. And I think it's a question we all have to ask ourselves right now is consumers certainly had access to any movie they wanted, any TV show they wanted at any time without any additional cost, except for a few one-off experiments. And certainly habits and perceptions changed. But then again, when movie theaters reopened and there were movies consumers wanted to see, they went back. And so the question is why, right? If movie theaters are just about movies, then consumers may not have come back. If it's just about the window, consumers may have just waited it out. It's about more than that. As the movie theater industry, we offer something communal, we offer something in person, and we offer something very deeply human. There's been lots and lots of studies about the impact of going to a movie on mental health. There's been studies about the air quality in a movie theater being different when you're watching a horror movie because people are holding their breath so much. So you actually have a very different physical and emotional experience. Figuring out exactly why it is that we are so important to communities, even after the pandemic, is going to help us as an industry grow even more. I think we have growth runway now, actually. I think we were a very stable business in the United States, and I think we have the potential to even grow because our necessity in communities is clear, and we just need to really lean into that and use it as an opportunity to grow even more.
I couldn't agree more. And I think if you go back to 2021, everyone talks about Top Gun Maverick, and rightfully so, that it was one of the movies that brought theaters back, and full kudos to that movie and fantastic. But even if you go back to like Godzilla versus Kong in like early 21, I remember Memorial Weekend of 21 with A Quiet Place Part 2. Free Guy later in that year. That was in the heat of the pandemic. I mean, some of the worst months of the pandemic. And when it seemed like when audiences were given the option to go, if the movie spoke to them and the marketing worked, they're like, heck with it, we're going to the theater. And those movies gave a lot of signs of hope for the industry. And then, of course, Spider-Man No Way Home had the second biggest opening weekend of all time in December of that year.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think for a lot of us, and Mike and I talk a lot about this, like if you put the movies out there, people will go to the theater.
Absolutely. And you think about some of the movies that came out in the earlier part of the pandemic, and you have to remember that some key markets were still closed. And so when you're in the LA, New York bubble, you think, well, people aren't going to the movies because they couldn't. But I crossed county lines multiple times to go see movies. And I would go to the theaters and see movies I couldn't see in Los Angeles because our theaters were closed. But I'd be in Orange County or I'd be in San Bernardino and I would be at a movie theater and people were there and they were really excited to be there. So if you were able to step outside of the bubble, you were able to see that consumers were excited. Now, certainly there were consumers that weren't coming back because they were still scared. Vaccines weren't widely available. We didn't know how they were going to work. I understand all of that, but people were coming back. And I think we have in our industry kind of an analysis problem. When you try and determine the success of anything, you look at the past. And the metrics that we've used, and this is going to be a tangent and a soapbox, so pardon me because I have a microphone and I will use it.
Go for it.
We have a business that's over a century old. And in the entire time that this business has been around, there have been key metrics we've needed to use to assess where should we distribute a movie to XYZ theater and how many prints should we make. And that was because that print itself costs a lot of money. And then even when the print went away, we had the virtual print fee, right? Which kept that cost going. Now, however, right as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're also at the end of the virtual print fee, right? So we have no more cost constraint. It costs nearly nothing to distribute a movie into a theater. So I think this is also a moment when we are trying to understand who we are and where we're going, that we should really not be looking at the past to determine the present for multiple reasons. We are not in the pandemic anymore, but we shouldn't be using a pre-pandemic numbers to assess what is good, what is normal, what is right. We are in a different era. So we need to reinvent our metrics. That's to allow for imagination and also to allow for us to not feel constrained by the past. I think, again, a movie, looking at a success of any title, you should look at how it's doing in communities. You shouldn't look at how it compares to a movie that you've determined is a similar movie for whatever reason. I think we can be a lot more creative going forward. And I kind of urge anyone who's listening that has any of that power to be creative in their metrics, to consider different ways to look at our business going forward. And I certainly encourage anyone in the press or anyone that, publicly talks about our industry to be in a position right now where anyone that is trying anything new and inventive, you look at that with enthusiasm, you applaud that innovation, and you do not punish that kind of innovation. Because when people put themselves out on the line and when they put their companies on the line and the industry tells them that they failed, it chills innovation in a moment right now where we should be all about innovation. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
That was a great soapbox. And you've been reiterating some of the things we've been saying over the last 6 months, Paul and I. One of the things that came to mind from that was, okay, we just finished up with what I consider to be the most successful CinemaCon/Show West I have ever attended. And I've only been to like 31 of them. It was amazing to me that I think what the pandemic did do was what you had said is it enabled all of those different distribution platform ideas that had been, mulling around. Everything got tried. And at the end of the day, where did we end up? Hey, guess what? A theatrical window actually adds value to the IP. We need to make sure we have a theatrical window. Every content provider, except for one, and I have theories on the one as to why they do what they do, but every content provider has now bought into that idea. And what it has shown us is exactly what you said, and that is the value of going to the movies and the communal experience and how something like Top Gun elevates itself from an event to a super event that the community all rallies around. And that adds so much value to the IP on all of those different downstreams.
Yeah. And look, I think so much has been made of streaming versus theatrical. And I don't think it ever made sense unless streaming decided to just completely avoid theatrical. But I think in-home viewing, somehow we've had collective amnesia about the fact that we all watched movies in the home before streaming. And in fact, I saw a report, and I won't name the provider just out of being nice right now. I saw a report, and in the report, it talked about, the report was all set up as all of these reports seem to be theatrical versus streaming, instead of streaming versus other in-home options, right? All of a sudden, in-home and out-of-home are being compared in a way that's not healthy. But anyway, in this report, it talks about the number of movies people stream in the home. And it talks about the average amount of time and would people prefer to see a movie in theaters first or in the home first? And when you look at the numbers, it's, you wonder, should I be concerned if I'm in the theatrical business or not? And so I reached out to this company and I said, okay, well, I see your number on how many movies people stream every month, every week. How does this compare to the DVD era? How does this compare to prior years? What does this mean? Like, give me context. And they had no data. So it looks like a sky is falling number. And the same with the theatrical versus streaming was also very interesting because the question that was asked of consumers was, all things being equal, would you rather watch a movie in the home first or in the theater first? And so when you ask a question like that, especially in mid-2020, there's also a health concern. And there's also, when you say all things being equal, people are thinking it's free. It's free in the home, right? They're not thinking I have to pay the same amount. They're not really thinking all things being equal. They're thinking movie theaters cost money and watching it in the home is free and I get it the same day. Well, of course, I'm going to pick that. But I got really just curious about these questions. And I think we should all be curious about studies and data, even ones that the Cinema Foundation puts out. Please, challenge us. But I looked into it and I found a Pew Research study from 2006, the height of the DVD era. And in that, consumers were watching about 2.5 times more movies in the home during the DVD era, which makes sense. There were more movies in theaters, more marketing about them. People were more excited. And also the number of people that said they would rather watch a movie in home versus theaters was actually 10% higher in 2006. So the sky is indeed not falling at all. In fact, consumers are more and more choosing theatrical over streaming. They're watching more TV, more YouTube, more other content in the home. Movies are becoming a smaller piece of the content pie in the home. And in order for a movie to stand out anywhere, whether it was in the DVD era or the streaming era, the movies consumers are going to choose to watch wherever it is and whenever it is that they're watching are going to be movies that they felt were theatrical, that they felt were big and worthy of it, that they'd heard about, that there was some sort of buzz, even if they're just going to hate watch it, which we've all done. We want to drink a little and laugh with our friends. We're still going to pick a movie that was in a theater. So it's just the right investment for any type of content.
And there's a couple of interesting things you mentioned there, Jackie, both in terms of how we look at the numbers and what they mean and using antiquated ideas of what the industry is, and then going back and constantly comparing to 2019,
Yes.
the pre-pandemic era when there were no streamer. Wait, there were streamers then, right? I mean, there is that antiquated notion of how we should look at the business, and it just doesn't make any sense.
You bring up a really good point because it got me thinking to when I was younger and actually had hair. There were the big, TV movie nights where you would have the big theatrical movie that would debut, and in TV Guide, for although you guys remember that before you had digital, you actually got a paper magazine that told you, but there would be the big close-up. And it would say, tonight, Sunday night on ABC, James Bond comes to the small screen, or whatever it happened to be. The reason those movies were a big deal was they had performed theatrically. And then, to Jackie's point, then we went into the VHS era, and then we went to the DVD era, and then we went to the streaming era. So I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. There has been this yin and yang has been going on for 50 plus years at least.
And you know what's interesting? I was reading a book about Walt Disney. And if you go back to the late 50s, early 60s, when they had that TV show, the Disney television program, back then, Walt Disney was quoted as saying, TV is a way to bring people to the theater. I mean, I'm talking in the late 50s. I mean, so this is something that's been going on for over 60 years. And we keep trying to reinvent the wheel on how we think about that. But that was seen as not a detriment to the big screen, but a way to get audiences excited about going to the movie theater.
And so I want to tie some of those thoughts together because, I fundamentally agree that 2019 is not the right metric for a lot of reasons. First of all, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, normal, what's normal. None of those conversations are helpful. But also 2019, I don't think is a good picture of where we can go. I don't think in 2019 we had enough movies for enough audiences. I think you're right. Streaming was around, and what was happening in streaming at that time was the streamers were deciding which movies belonged on streaming platforms and which ones belonged in theaters. And they were taking entire genres out of the marketplace and putting them exclusively on the streaming platform to see if that would bring more audiences or more prestige. Now, we've discovered that that doesn't do that, but we still haven't had enough strong investment in, hey, all of these movies that we're making, all of these genres that people do really like on the platforms, why don't we at least put them in some theaters? Why don't we start marketing them? Why don't we see if we can grow those genres back to where they were before? Because consumers do seem to like them. I think a lot of the comedies and romantic comedy, there are lots of genres that I think did better because they had the DVD numbers to supplement. I think we should be more holistic about value now, too. I think, skipping theatrical entirely, even though theatrical release costs something, you do need to do a marketing campaign. Even though the VPFs have gone away, you do need to invest in marketing, but you need to invest in marketing either way. Why are we looking at the return on theatrical as the entire pie when it certainly isn't and never was, right? Again, during the height of the DVD era, the theatrical release, the theatrical just in general, was a small portion of the overall revenue studios were getting. DVDs were about double, I believe. It was a huge revenue driver. So why are we not thinking holistically? Why are we still dividing ourselves, streaming versus theatrical, home versus theater, when we should really be analyzing each title over its lifetime, not just over one part?
And also, what about just, we fixate on blockbusters, which not we, but I mean, in general. But if you look at any given weekend recently, you're getting Indian films in there, you're getting event cinema popping into the top 10, you're getting independent cinema, independent films, which is another genre that people have kind of just couched as saying, oh, those aren't going to do well in the theater. Well, you know what? Give them a chance. Put them in the theater.
And again, let's be comfortable with the fact that we have to regrow audiences. We have to market in a whole different way. We all know that. So we know how to market blockbusters. And we know the spray and pray works for those. It is a challenging environment to communicate with audiences on other titles, right? I mean, I obviously, if you look at my Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, you can tell I like musicals and you can tell I like going to the movies. And yet I only know about a lot of the movies because I work in this industry. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that they exist, right? And if I'm not going to a lot of the big tent poles because they don't appeal to me personally, then I'm also not seeing trailers for some of the movies that I actually would want to see. So it's a challenging environment. I certainly acknowledge that, but I think it's still worth the investment because I think if we're growing audiences, if we think of that as a process instead of just one-offs. If we kind of all as an industry commit to supporting that. And I think that there's more we can do, right? I think movie theaters have enhanced their loyalty programs. I think they can keep growing them. We've got things like National Cinema Day, which we can really use to promote upcoming titles, maybe that don't have the same kind of marketing love. And then we have the benefit kind of the Cinema Foundation, right? This is an all industry body. We can do big industry promotional opportunities, leveraging the social media and loyalty programs of all of exhibition. We can talk to the global exhibition community and the studios and our vendor partners. There's just a lot more we can do cost effectively together that we haven't fully been able to embrace. And I hope we can really think through that.
Well, I think you bring up a really, really good point. And I think one of the key advertising avenues that has emerged over the last probably 10 years or so is the exhibitor marketing platforms, because those exhibitors have a ton of data on, who's going to the movies, who's doing what, and to be able to target market to you, Jackie, and say, I know you like musicals. Guess what? This is coming up and we think you would like it, is so effective. And it's such a good way for the studios to spend their dollars. And it's a great way for the exhibitors to continue that communication with their audience.
Yep. But I don't think we should limit ourselves as an industry to our most frequent moviegoers. I think that's low-hanging fruit. But I think, there are a lot of people that don't go to the movies. There's many different reasons, but I think not all of those are lost causes. And just to use National Cinema Day as an example, about a quarter of that audience hadn't been to the theater in years. Hey, come to the movies. We didn't have a specific movie we were pushing. We were just like, hey, remember when you would just go to the movies? You can just go. And we made the price obviously very, accessible, but there was no friction. It was just go to the movies, just come see something. We're celebrating movie going, see a bunch of movies, and people listen. A lot of kids came that hadn't been to the movies probably ever.
This is a perfect setup because I was thinking about the fact that I was talking to a journalist friend and she has a kid, little kid. And she was talking about how on the playground, the kids were talking about how many times have you seen Super Mario Brothers in a theater? Now, that's the future, right? Because yes, we love the movie theater. We grew up on the movie theater, meaning those of us, and I'm older than both of you, but of a certain age. But don't you think it's got to be super inspiring or important, or just, I think, such good news for theaters that kids who are going to be the future consumers or movie fans, I prefer to say, are going to want to go to the theater, because when they went to see Super Mario 3 times in the theater back in 2023, maybe that's the inspiration to keep going to the movie theater in an era where they are bombarded by content on a small screen.
Let's take it a step further and think about the parents. There were a lot of people that had children for the first time during the pandemic or right before the pandemic, and they certainly have been using the TV as a babysitter, for better or for worse, right? You look at the top 10 titles across all the streaming platforms. When you're looking at movies, it's like Sing 2 is the dominant movie across like multiple platforms. It's babysitting, right? These streaming platforms are, for a lot of parents, babysitting. My son would wake up at 5 a.m. every day for like months and watch Bad Guys, just for an example. So I get that. But when a parent is able to take their kid to a movie theater and the parent is able to experience, not only is my child being entertained, but I also am kind of relaxed at the same time. My house isn't being torn to bits. And if I'm that kind of parent and I'm in that kind of theater, I can have a recliner and a glass of wine. And somehow I just did a great bonding activity with my kids and I left the house. But yet I'm leaving feeling relaxed and not stressed out. Certainly when you ask consumers about how they value different experiences, movie theaters are the top value, right? We commissioned a major study and consumers overwhelmingly selected movie theaters as the best bang for their buck. But the second one was an amusement park. But you think about how you feel after a day at an amusement park and whether or not there's value there, you're exhausted, you are drained, and you do not feel that way after going to a movie theater. So when you're thinking, I have a certain amount of dollars to spend, I want to occupy my family, I want to give my kids something that's out of the house, because being in the house is bad for mental health. My kids are all suffering. What do I do? The movie theater is absolutely the option that I think more and more of them are going to lean into, the more we can give them movies that they want to bring their kids to.
Well, it's funny. I did my own empirical research, Jackie and Mike, by going to the movie theater when Dungeons and Dragons and Super Mario were in theaters. And so there were a bunch of parents at the bar and their kids running around, and they just seemed like they were all having a great time. And for the money, it's a bargain. I don't want to hear people complaining about, I get people always have complained about movie ticket prices compared to anything else outside of the home and the escapism you get from that for just going out. But I like what you said. That shows also the holistic approach to the movie fan experience. I don't call them consumers. They're movie fans. When they go to the theater, if you have that great experience, it's just great. And you talk, and we could go another hour. I know we don't have a lot of time left here, but we'd love to have you back on the show. But also to, talking about the PLFs and the premium large formats and IMAX. And I also want to mention the importance of sound. It's not just about that big picture. That sound is important too. Anyway, I'm hitting a lot of points here, but
no, but you're right. To some consumers that matters. To some movie fans that matters. And when you talk about ticket price, I think it's such an interesting conversation, right? Because people have gotten in the habit of saying that movies are too expensive or movies are expensive, right? It's just one of those things. Like I joke, I used to say growing up that I liked all music except for country and opera, which was a ridiculous thing to say since I studied opera and I didn't even know country music, but it was what all kids said. So I said it. It's the same thing with movie tickets. And so that's why I think when we talk about price versus value, I think we need to have a different conversation. Same with concessions. In that same study, when we talked about value, almost 100% of consumers share concessions. When you're sharing popcorn, when you break it out per person, it is so cheap. It was also like the same, like over 90% of people almost always buy concessions when they go to a theater. So do they think they're expensive or not? Because they're going and they're buying them. So they must see that there's value. Same thing with ticket prices. We're seeing an overwhelming amount of consumers choosing time and time again to go to the most premium experience possible. So they are choosing a ticket price that is more expensive than if they went on a Tuesday night or if they went on a matinee or if they went to just a standard format theater. They are choosing a PLF during peak time. They know that that's the most expensive ticket. So to say that movie tickets are expensive when you're choosing the most expensive option is a little bit misleading. And I think it's just a habit we've gotten into.
And I think you need to look at it as a value proposition in the other things that you do. Because one of the things I was going to say is, have you bought a beer at a baseball game lately? My God, you need a cosigner to be able to do that. It's ridiculous. So
exactly.
When you talk about the value proposition going to the movies, it's still one of the best you're going to find.
The best. You're literally not going to find another out-of-home entertainment option that price.
And it's also true if you go to a restaurant, people look at the wine list. Do they want the cheapest bottle on the wine? No. People want to pay for that premium experience no matter what it is. And then the difference between, let's say, a coach class ticket on an airline and first class is almost insurmountable for many people. But going from a regular ticket to a PLF or, IMAX, a premium format, it's not a huge extension of the finances to get there, and it offers up such a great experience. But we definitely wanted to ask you about the mission, again, of the Cinema Foundation, your recent surveys and reports. What can you tell our audience if they just landed from outer space? Tell them about the Cinema Foundation.
Look, the Cinema Foundation is an extension of the, to bring it back to the very beginning of this conversation, the all industry efforts that were used during the pandemic, that optimism and all hands on deck and we're all in this together spirit, it needs to continue. So we developed an all industry body that uses data and collaboration to solve problems and grow the industry together. We do things that promote the industry. We work with the creative community. We're all about data and research. And we're also about our employees and our diversity on screen, right? So we do things like National Cinema Day, which brings all of us together to promote the industry on one single day a year. We also did National Popcorn Day. We're going to have an employee recruitment campaign that describes how our industry is a great place to start and grow a career. I think people think about our industry as an entry-level industry and don't realize that there are real executive jobs, both in the movie theater side of the business, but also that a job in the movie theater industry is a job in the movie industry, and that there are a lot of people that started on that entry-level path and have ended up senior executives everywhere in the business. I mean, you see it all over. It's a really unique industry. And so we want to be able to tell that story because we also have something unique that other industries don't have. When we surveyed people that worked at movie theaters or wanted to work at movie theaters and asked them why, over 90% of them said it's because they love movies. And that's not the same with other industries, like a Home Depot. People aren't there because they love lumber. So we have something that's really valuable that we need to really capitalize on. Our people are such an asset because they love being part of this business. And so we need to really help develop that message and grow our employees and support them. And the foundation can do that really holistically. We have lots and lots of research. Go to cinemafoundation.org. You'll see some of the research we've commissioned. It is, again, it's all industry. We are really trying to work with great partners to be curious fundamentally. We're not trying to develop skewed research. It is our strong belief and our working thesis that movie theaters are important to our culture. Movie theaters are important to our economy, but we're going to do the work to show if that's true and what are our opportunities for growth. So really anyone can be part of the Cinema Foundation. We accept donations, we accept time, we accept ideas. Come to the table. We're setting it for you.
Well said, Jackie. Thank you so much. You're such a great advocate and champion for this industry. We're all very lucky to have you in this community, and which goes out beyond just us to moviegoers who love. They're the ones who dictate what everyone does in this industry.
Yep.
Not the moguls, not the others. It's the audience. But I really appreciate you being on. Mike, you have any additional thoughts here for Jackie?
I think you summed that up really well, and it brought me back to my roots when I was 17 and I started as an usher at the Egyptian in Hollywood. I just saw Empire Strikes Back was just celebrating its 40th anniversary, and I'm like, God, I remember when I was working that movie. Wow, I'm old. But there's something about this industry that is infectious, and to Jackie's point, if you're a cinemaphile and a movie fan, there's a connection to, the movies that you feel working in the industry. So I would recommend it to anybody. Contrary to those naysayers who might have been out there, it's not going anywhere. If anything, it's evolving, and it's only going to become, a bigger and better industry.
And I will do a shout out to the movie theater employees at the Napa Cinedome who would regularly give me the big giant bag of popcorn they were going to throw away if I went to the last movie. I didn't work in a movie theater, but I guess I took out the trash.
Love that.
Well, that was good. Okay, so real quick, and we got to let you go. But Jackie, how did you get involved in all of this craziness?
Very briefly, so I've always been a frequent moviegoer. I worked in hospitality for a long time in fine dining, and then I was a lawyer, and I was miserable as a lawyer, and I wanted to start over. And I had a belief that the best way to start over was start from the bottom. And I found a job at Nato that was manager of industry relations. It was pretty much an entry-level job. And I felt like I could add value with my background as a consumer and then as an academic, as a lawyer, anthropologist, all of those things. I felt like I could add some value, but I also more importantly felt like I could learn a lot. It turned out to be even more of the case than I thought. I mean, obviously, John and Patrick, who hired me, were incredible mentors, but this entire industry is full of people that are mentors. There's been a long history of mentorship in this business, and it shows. So a lot of people have told me stories over and over again. And those stories, if I hear a story 3 times, I know it's important. There's a lot of storytellers, a lot of mentors, a lot of history. And I've been really grateful just to have all of that downloaded. And I found my home.
That's great, Jackie. Thank you so much. I just want to thank Jackie Brenneman, President of the Cinema Foundation, Executive Vice President and General Counsel at Nato, National Association of Theater Owners. My co-host, Mike Polydorus, Paul DeGarabedian. We thank you, Jackie, for being on Ticket to Ride, our Comscore podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
We'll see you soon. We'll see you at the movies.